Hello and welcome to this latest edition of the Powder Blue podcast. My name is Frank Close. I'm joined by Geoff Mosher and Hunter Brody. And gentlemen, for the first time, now we've talked about Arizona. We talked about Arizona and Florida. We talked about Arizona, Florida, and Texas. We talked about everything in between, playing on an island in the middle of the South Pacific. There's an actual proposal now where Major League Baseball could be played. And that's kind of the big story today. How are you guys doing?
Oh yeah,
I'm good, but I'm really I feel like I think Hunter feels this way too. I feel like this is an emotional game of tug of war, and I'm we're the guy in the middle, and I'm just like, please just tell me there's either going to be baseball or not, because I'm tired of getting really into it, and then it's not going to happen. Then yes, and then it's just not going to happen. Just tell me. Either stick a fork in me or give me baseball.
Right. I was going to say, oh yeah, I'm starting to get my juices going just a bit because it seems legit that this 80-game schedule might be a thing, and the only problem at this point is it's going to have to come down to money. The billionaires and the millionaires are now fighting to see who's going to get paid what, and that's going to be a big-time problem. But, we see this proposal of maybe July 4th, and I just want to put it in comparison to where we are now. That's 8 weeks away, and we've been in quarantine for 8 weeks, so it's still a decent time away for things to happen.
Well, let's break down what this latest proposal is. And from what we understand, this is a pretty legitimate proposal. And the items that we're going to get to go over have actually been discussed. And a step above that, as reported by many outlets on Monday, including the Associated Press, this is agreed to by the owners. So now, when we have these conversations, we know there's something to it, and I think that makes this perhaps the most encouraging development that we've seen just yet. So let's break down a little bit of this. And Ken Rosenthal did a good job sort of breaking this proposal on Saturday, and by Monday, the owners did meet, talked about all the different things Ken Rosenthal had said, and by Monday, we kind of know what those things were and what they kind of worked out among the owners. So let's break down some of this. Now, Ronald Blum of the Associated Press had a good breakdown about this. So first, we'll talk about the number of games. So 82 is the number that's the number right here. So basically a hockey season or a basketball season. So let me ask you guys first. Let's start with you, Geoff. Is 82 good enough to play a baseball season?
That's almost an existentialist question. I mean, it's baseball or not baseball, right? I mean, is it going to be the same? No. 82. What is it? Baseball is 162 games, so 82 is almost like a half of a season. We've been through something similar. Well, I don't know. Hunter was I don't know if Hunter was born in 1994. He was not born in
1994.
Nope,
were you, Hunter?
I was not. I might have been in the stomach, depending on what time of the year it was.
Anyway, stop making us feel old, Geoff. Continue.
2/3 of this podcast has been through a strike-shortened season before. Now that was kind of in reverse, right? So it's like the season. There was no World Series that year, so that sucked a lot. Where you had baseball and then it was taken away from you and no closure. This at least gives you a starting point theoretically and an ending point. We've said it all along. We're going to have to just readjust what we expect out of our baseball season this year. I do think 82 games is, for what we're talking about, going to be satisfactory.
Does that do it for you, Hunter?
It does. I'm actually pleasantly surprised with the number 82. We can still salvage this thing, and it can be something where, it's enough where teams are playing a decent amount of games. There will be teams that battle out to the top, and it's not, for example, if you played 30 games, that's such a small amount of numbers that, a team can play red hot for those 30 games and make it. 82, you still got to play decent ball for a significant amount of time.
Let's put it this way, Frank, and I think you'd agree with me on this, and maybe Hunter too. I'll take 82-game season over a stupid baseball tournament that we any day of the week, any time of the week. Baseball is a marathon sport. It's not a tournament sport.
Well, it might actually benefit the Phillies, though, because if you think about this, we always collapse in that August, right? The last couple of years, at least. You collapse in the August and the September. Well, this might give them a little benefit of the doubt here. They might be able to push through and not have to worry about that collapse.
Or the collapse just starts 1 month into their season.
Oh,
Which,
come on. You got to be that guy.
By the way, since you brought it up, 2019, after 82 games, the Philadelphia Phillies were 43-39, and that was tied for the fourth best record in the National League. So they'd be a playoff team.
Proves my point.
So, but then no, they're gonna have a
every
collapse
season
anyway.
should be like this.
But of course, they did not play all the different opponents that they would otherwise play. But 82, that's going to be the number. It seems like. Now, again, we'll talk about the Players Association later about whether or not they'll like it. But for us, that's the first thing here. Now, how about the second thing here? Teams play in their home ballparks with no fans, but if they need to, they can pivot to spring training sites. So, for example, if there's an outbreak of COVID-19 in, say, Philadelphia, the Phillies can simply fly to Clearwater and play there instead if it is better for their health. What do you think of that opportunity, Geoff?
I think it sounds like a strange but only rational other, plan B for a situation like that. I just, what constitutes a COVID outbreak? Is it a certain percentage of households? Is it, like take New York, right? When this began, there was a pocket of like right up north of Manhattan, New Rochelle, right, which is like north of the city on the way to Connecticut, that had a real big outbreak, and it was like this pocket of New York that was inconsistently suffering more so than the rest of New York until the rest of New York caught up. So, what if you had a case in Philly where South Philly had the outbreak, right? Well, obviously that's where they play the game. Or what if it was the Northeast? Would they be able to then play the games in South Philly? I feel like it's way too open-ended and vague when they say if there's a COVID outbreak. What constitutes an outbreak?
Well, I'm thinking more about the traveling, and they're playing in these ballparks. Well, that means they're going to have to travel. Now, clearly they're not going in commercial with millions of people and everyone's taking all these planes everywhere. They're going to be in their own bubble, flying to these places or traveling to these places along the East Coast. But still, it does seem a little weird to me that that's just open, as if, hey, you guys can travel wherever, instead of using this quarantine method like you're hearing the NBA talk about, maybe doing it just in Disney or just in Las Vegas. If that's an option, right, why wouldn't you go with that option? It seems safer.
I definitely have, Frank, severe doubts whether baseball can pull this off, because what Hunter just described with the travel, being in an airplane that's going to circulate the same air, you're asking every single player who's involved and every coach who's involved, manager who's involved, maybe front office person who's involved, to be doing this, the traveling and being close and everything like that, and yet be able to quarantine and stay away and not pick up COVID. So if baseball can pull that off, God bless them. But I don't see how, based on the information that we have right now.
And one more interesting thing about the location. So there's not really travel between the U.S. and Canada right now. So they actually say the Toronto Blue Jays could be the Dunedin Blue Jays to at least start the season. So that's an interesting thing there too, because, Clearwater's neighbor is Dunedin, Florida, where the Blue Jays train. Well, that might be their home base for a while. So that's an interesting little wrinkle in this too. But since you mentioned the regional travel, let's get to the next point here. Essentially, they're going to play regionally. So the AL East and the NL East will play each other. The NL Central, the AL Central will play each other. The AL West, the NL West. So they're trying to find ways to keep them from traveling too much. Now, let me ask you this, Hunter. Does it make a difference if you're only flying between Boston and Miami? Or, what's the difference between that or flying from Boston to San Diego?
Well, I mean, you're traveling longer distances, right? I mean, in theory, you're still getting in the plane and you're going somewhere. But if you're doing that for longer trips, and I don't know, because we don't know how this coronavirus travels, right? Like, does it matter? If nobody has it and everyone who's in the plane, they all do not have it, and you're flying from Philly to Boston, let's just say, okay, well, how's that going to hurt anyone? Or if you put the same scenario, they're flying from Philly to San Diego and nobody has it. Does it hurt anyone even though it's a longer ride? In theory, I would say no, right? But I don't know. I just don't know how this all works.
I have so many questions. The NBA shut down when it found out one person had COVID, right? It was not Donovan Mitchell. It was Rudy Gobert. No, yeah, it was Rudy Gobert.
Yeah, they both
and
had
then
it.
right, but they shut it down. So you're telling me the baseball has this elaborate plan that they've spent weeks developing and they've got it worked out. What happens if one player tests
And
positive for COVID? What do they
that
do?
does not seem to be clear just yet. Do you just quarantine that player? Do you quarantine everybody he was around, including the entire
It might be
team?
too
Do they
late.
all have to just take 2 weeks off? Like seems to be the regular number. My good friend, her roommate had it, who was a nurse, and
Well,
so
how does the KBO get around this right now to the point where they're high-fiving each other and they're doing the same thing where they're getting swabbed and they're getting tested and it seems like they have some sort of method. So until someone tests positive in the league, we don't know what they're going
Well, that's
to
what
do.
I was going to say. In fairness, they just started this thing up, and who knows a week or two now how well it's going to work out for them.
now some of the testing is much more advanced than it was, March 12th when things suspended. There are some rapid response tests, although even the one that we saw in the White House with the outbreak in the White House, there's a 15% false positive, false negative response on those. So it's getting better and getting better and getting better. But we'll see. Maybe, heck, it's been 2 months, right? You just said that, Geoff, right? It was March 12th that they packed up in Clearwater and came. 2 months seems to be a long time, right, in terms of development. So maybe they're kind of banking that by a month from now, which will be mid-June, that's kind of the date that they have picked for spring training 2 to begin. Maybe it'll be even more advanced at this point. Right? That's kind of reasonable to think, right?
Well, I
Yeah.
kind of want to bring something up. Remember last episode we talked about Geoff Passan and how he kind of downplayed Trevor Plouffe's report a bit and said, well, it's on the table, but it doesn't really mean much because there's still a lot that has to go on. What was it? The next day he came out with this full report, and we questioned if that was part of his game plan. I think we were on to something.
You were onto something. You went. You're being humble. Like, I'll give all the credit to you because I don't want to be associated with your ideas. But
well, wait. Since you said it, Frank, I'm sorry, but I'm thinking now. If baseball was really smart, wouldn't you make the Toronto Blue Jays become the Buffalo Blue Jays and have them in the Northeast, traveling to New York and Boston and Cleveland and Pittsburgh? They're all cities that you can take buses to if you needed to.
No. That would make sense, Moshe. That would make sense.
That is a tremendous point that actually I wanted to bring up. Buffalo, if you're not aware, Buffalo is the Buffalo Bisons. They are the AAA affiliate of the Toronto Blue Jays.
Right.
Why aren't they saying this about any of these teams, right? If all of a sudden St. Petersburg has an outbreak, why not go play in Durham? The Durham Bulls, right? That's the Rays AAA team. It seems like these facilities are adequate that they could do this anywhere, not just the spring training sites. But I like that idea a lot better, Geoff, that they could play at their AAA home rather than their Florida home. I guess.
Plus the broadcasts, right? Every game is going to be broadcast on a regional network, I imagine. So why are you going to make the people from Toronto fly all the way down to Dunedin and spend their time there away from their families? And during this, Buffalo is a much quicker trip. I don't want to say it's right across the river, but or the falls, but it's a lot more feasible.
Hey, here's a question: will the broadcasters be allowed into the United States to even do that?
Question.
So, yeah, that's another thing that could possibly happen here. So we'll have to see. But yeah, why limit it to just the Class A stadiums when you have several affiliates that could help a team out? Maybe you mentioned maybe there's an outbreak in Northeast Philly, so maybe you just say, all right, guys, let's get the bus and go up to Allentown and play where the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs play. So. I wonder if that'll be in the cards. I wonder if that will be discussed. And I think there's at least a sort of sense of home for the major league players in Dunedin. I guess that's the one advantage, because they do spend 6 weeks there in the spring, and it's very familiar to them. And at least the team offices are there, so that might be the difference. But you're right. Buffalo is right across the little old lake between Toronto and Buffalo.
Now, did they say anything, Frank, about the whole family situation? Because I know that was a big thing with one of the 9 million reports that came out over the last few months was about them being so quarantined that they weren't going to be able to see their family. And there were some players that were just having kids and they were having to go see their kids be born and very important things. Has that been brought up in this new report?
Yes, not yet. Now, Mike Trout was the big one. Mike Trout basically said, look, I don't want to be isolated in Arizona when my wife is giving birth to my first child. So for Mike Trout or any player, right? I mean, I would hope that anybody in any job everywhere has the opportunity to see their children born. I mean, I think that's something that people deserve. And I don't think they need to perhaps quarantine for 2 weeks if they go do it. But, I think that they're perhaps learning more about the spread of the disease and ways that it's going to be transmitted. If you're outdoors, that they say that it's really hard to catch it outdoors. So if they're playing in an outdoor facility in open air, they're probably okay for the games. Now we'll talk about the player perspective in a little bit, and some of their concerns are about the closed quarters for like the locker rooms and stuff like that. But they might be able to have enough information that they can do this where it's not going to be so dramatic. Where like at the beginning of this, where we felt that everybody would transmit it if you just walk past somebody on the street. It seems like they have a little bit more of the science about the how the droplets are spread and the prime conditions. So I think that will certainly affect how this goes forward. All right, so I want to get through this list in this first segment if we can. So let's keep going down the list here. Playoffs. They're going to do something that they proposed a while back, and that was to have 7 playoff teams per league. 7 per league. So you got to imagine that you'll have your division winners. So that accounts for 6 total out of these 14, and that's a lot of wild cards. So why do you think you do this now? Is there an advantage to throw this new playoff scheme in this year as all this is going on? Will that help circumstances, Geoff?
I think it's actually a good way for MLB to kind of test and see how they think that format works out, because people might complain about it, but they're going to complain about it being a non-traditional year anyway. So the worst they can get, or if you think about it the other way, the best they can get is that, hey, people really liked it, and then they feel more confident with it going forward. People say they don't like it. Baseball, which is going to do this anyway, is going to say that's because people just didn't like the whole fact that baseball wasn't baseball. And so I think it's a perfect time for them. I'm putting my Manfred cap on right now, and thinking that that's how they're probably seeing it.
Yeah, I think this is a good chance to give it a shot. You can see what it will be like, similar to everything else that they're possibly changing as well, and I'm sure we'll get down that on the list. But, they're throwing it out there. They're giving it a chance. They're going to see what it's like. And because it is a shortened season, maybe it ties into something I said before, where if you are a team because the games it's not 162, a full game season, it allows teams to maybe get in there, good teams that didn't have the best regular season, but they're still really solid, and maybe they get hot at the right time. It still gives them an opportunity to compete in the playoffs.
And here's one thing I want to throw out there. So I mentioned a little while ago that the Phillies at 82 games last year were 43-39. I also mentioned they were tied with the Colorado Rockies for 4th place. Now, did either team make the playoffs last year?
No,
negative. Right? So maybe the smaller sample size, you almost have to offer this, because you might argue that last year's Colorado Rockies and last year's Philadelphia Phillies didn't deserve to make the playoffs. Now, who won the World Series last year? Lest you forget already.
It wasn't the Astros. No, it was the Nationals.
No, it was the Washington Nationals. Well, 82 games in, they were 2 games behind the Phillies and would not have made the playoffs if 82 was the cutoff. So,
right. So
do you need to have because the sample size is smaller, does that mean that you have to almost take more teams just so nobody's left out that probably deserve to be there?
I don't know if it means you have to, but I think it makes a pretty good case for why you would want to open it up. It's a shortened season. Some teams are going to struggle out of the box just because, like the Nationals last year, some teams are going to get hot, and you want to give as many teams a chance to prove themselves in a shortened time frame. So I can see the legitimacy to that.
Yeah, you made some decent points.
Oh, nice. Gee, thank you.
They were good points. They were really good points. Decent points.
Decent points. Gosh, Hunter giving us some credit for once.
Now we know what happens when Hunter has nothing to add to a conversation. He's just going to say, you made some good points.
Isn't that how this works?
Moving on.
Yeah. I don't know I don't know how to move on after that. Actually, and you totally
That
totally thrown me. You've totally thrown me off here. So now, yeah. So then there's one more thing here, and I think this is going to carry us into to really the next segment here, because the last thing about it here is, what do you pay the players? Now let's recap what was happening before when gameplay stopped back in March. There was a $170 million front from MLB to front some money to the players, kind of in advance of their salaries, recognizing that they would have to pay some bills while they were shut down. They might not have expected to be shut down this long, but kind of the deal was, when we come back, we'll play the prorated number of games, and we will pay you based on the prorated number. So, for example, since JT Realmuto has a nice round number of $10 million, if he's going to make $10 million for 162 games, if they play 81, he would get $5 million, right? That's what they agreed to. But here's the problem. There's no tickets being sold. And therefore, revenue is way down. Besides the tickets themselves, it's the concessions, it's the $14 beers, it's the $9 hot dogs, right? That's a good source of revenue for major league teams. So, again, we're going to get into this in more depth next segment. But what's a realistic way, Geoff, that you can actually say to the players, look, we can't have you earn what you agreed to earn, but what comes after that but, Geoff?
No, that's a great question. And of course, I have questions. I want to know, do TV rights stay the same, or do those get renegotiated for this year? And in my mind, because you've seen how the NFL drafted and you know that everybody's at home, I think it stands to reason that ratings are going to be really high locally on all the RSNs that cover these regional teams, right? And so if they're making more money, the owners, from TV rights, that helps them, compensate from what they're losing from a gate receipt, then maybe the players shouldn't have to ask for that much less money.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I just know this. I don't know how they're going to get it done. I know it's going to be a sticky situation because both parties are not going to want to budge, and the millionaire owners are going to want to continue to make a lot of money, but these players are going to want to get paid what they feel is right. They're both going to have to make an agreement where they're going to have to take some and give some, and they both need to do that because there's people out there like us who want sports back on, and if it's going to be a waiting match between these two when we know or think we know that we can get sports back, but it's just a fight between money, I feel like that's going to be a really ugly look for the league, the owners, and the players. At some point, someone's going to have to budge. They're going to have to mutually agree so we can get sports.
Well, the good thing is that if there is baseball, that the owners and the players are going to make more money than if there's not baseball. So they can fight it all they want, but at the end of the day, both sides are going to want to make more money than not making money. So they'll figure that out.
All right. Well, we'll break into that a little bit more during our next segment, but it's our time for our first break. This is the Powder Blue Podcast. Frank Close, Geoff Mosher, Hunter Brody. We'll be back right after this. And welcome back to the Powder Blue Podcast. Frank Close, Geoff Mosher, Hunter Brody, and we are talking about finally a brand new proposal that is actually out there, approved by Major League Baseball owners. It's no more conjecture. It's no more, let's leak something to one of the major media outlets like Jeff Passan or Bob Nightingale and see what everybody thinks about it. So this is a hardcore proposal, and this is one that is accepted by the owners. Although the problem is, this is the one accepted by the owners. Now, that gets us to our next point. Now, the MLB Players Association is run by Tony Clark. I'm sorry, I don't know why I forgot his name for a second. Former first baseman for the Detroit Tigers. Maybe you remember him. He was a nice player in his day. But Tony Clark,
6'7", I think.
What's that?
6'7".
Yeah, tall guy. But nice player in his day. He now leads the Players Association, and they're supposed to meet with him tomorrow to talk about this. Now, I don't think the players are just going to simply say, okay, and they'll be on with their day. So here's something really funny I want to throw out there. Andy Martino. Maybe you remember Andy Martino. He wrote for the Philadelphia Inquirer for a little while, but he is with the sports network in New York that covers the New York Mets. So that basically their version of NBC Sports Philly. But
SNY.
yep, and Andy Martino, he says, expectation in the industry is the union will turn down MLB's initial proposal. A negotiation would then ensue. And then I love this next thing. He says Scott Boras will be quoted during that time. Well, Scott Boras already had something to say, and actually so did Tony Clark. So let's break down a little bit what people are saying here. So Tony Clark actually immediately responded to this proposal. And what do you think his reaction is?
Probably hell no.
Well, here's what's going to come down to here. So the report says that baseball owners and players, they would go to a 50-50 split of the revenue, that the owners and players, we'd figure out what it is, split it down the middle. And this is Stephanie Epstein of SI.com. She writes that, just to sort of quote her on the terms of this deal, it says that they would ask the players to forego their salaries and instead split all revenue 50-50, that they would play 82 games, and that they would expand the playoffs to 14 teams. Okay. So now the details are basically that. Now, let's just talk about the revenue split from the beginning. Is that enough going to the players 50-50?
I think theoretically that sounds like a good idea. I just don't think the players are ever going to agree to it. I don't think they trust that the owners would give them the accurate number, because in order for the players to know what 50-50 is, they have to know what the entire pot is. And the only flow of information on what the pot is going to come from MLB, the owners. There's not a lot of trust between players and owners in any organization, in any league. So I just don't see that being the case. And how would that work, by the way? So they get no salary until after the year, and then what? Everybody gets one big lump sum?
Yeah, that's the real question here. How are you able to really gauge that? Like, are you going to have to go like a few weeks by a few weeks, like, you know, like a salesperson gets their commission check based on how they did the last couple of weeks? I mean, I think that's a really, really tough one to consider here.
How do you divvy it up? Like, let's say theoretically, let's use a number. Let's say baseball generates $1 billion this year. Big number, ridiculous, but whatever. So the players get $500 million. How does that get distributed among the players?
I was going to say, what does Mike Trout make compared to Vince Velasquez?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a real concern. How do you figure that out? Now, here's Tony Clark's response, all right? He says a system that restricts player pay based on revenues is a salary cap, period. And he says MLB is trying to take advantage of a global health crisis to get what they failed to achieve in the past. Now, is he being the hardline, Players Association rep here, or is there some validity to what he's saying? Like, this is, they're almost taking advantage of the situation to make there be a hard line cap.
Let me tell you something. You guys both know this already, right? And so do most people. The Major League Baseball could be presenting tomorrow, the union, the players' union, with the most perfectly articulated, well-written, greatest set of documents ever created in the history of the world. And Tony Clark would look at it and say, we're not doing this. That's just the reality of negotiations between players and you. It doesn't matter. So is there validity to the statement? Maybe. I don't know. Was he going to turn down the original offer just because that's what you have to do? Yes, that's exactly what was going to happen. Doesn't matter how perfect the documentation is. In fact, I think it would be funny if they tried to call him on it once. If the document said the player's going to make 100% of the profits, and then, not even tell them what it says. Be like, oh no, we fundamentally turned this down.
Yeah, that would be something. Yeah, I mean, it seems like it would be a solid result and a solid answer, 50-50. Well, what is there to argue about? You're getting 50, you're getting 50. It makes a lot of sense. But I think it is important to value these players then. And I think that's where the difficulty is going to come in, because you're going to have these superstar players that deserve way more than the bullpen guys, like Seranthony Dominguez. I know he's going through some stuff right now, but how do you pay him a certain amount, but say, you know what, you're not worth as much as Bryce Harper, though, so you're going to get paid this, even though all the players are getting 50-50. I just think that is going to be a super messy situation.
I would add on to that, Frank, and I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, if you start to talk about the health and safety risks involved in this happening, it's certainly way more on the player side than the ownership side. It's easy for owners to be able to maintain their distance. They're not really putting their lives on the line to have baseball. I think the players can make a fair argument that they deserve more than 50% just based on the risk inherent in playing the sport alone.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the frontline workers right now deserving hazard pay. Well, essentially, the owners are saying we want you to be out there and put yourself at risk so that we can profit. I mean, maybe players aren't willing to do that, and unfortunately, I mean, I know that's an unfortunate side effect to a capitalistic system as it is. Not to talk economics too much, but people don't really like that. I mean, I've heard grocery workers say they don't like being put at risk, especially when a now there's a lot of very well run grocery stores around here right now that protect their workers, but the ones that have been a little shoddy, they take that personally, and I don't think it matters how much money you make. You're not going to want to be subject to that, right, Hunter?
Yeah, I have a question for you guys. Gil and I were talking about this today on the Sports Bash, and if there were, say, Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, Justin Verlander, Mookie Betts, all those players want to play, but 20 of the Cesar Hernandez's of the world don't feel like playing. Do you think that the league would lean towards playing compared to if Trout, Bryce Harper, Verlander didn't feel like playing, but 20 Cesar Hernandez's did feel like going through? Because where does the Players Association, where's the line drawn in terms of what type of players want to go through with this process?
You make a great point because the superstars have big salaries. They probably had a big salary the year before and they have some money in the bank, but there's a lot of players out there fighting for their professional lives, and 2020 might be their last shot at the big leagues and their last chance to earn some money for their families. So I think you're onto something. I don't think there's going to be a universal agreement among the players. I mean, maybe
there certainly won't be.
Yeah. Do you give some players an out? Let's say that we're going to talk a little bit about Jake Diekman in a minute, but Jake Diekman has dealt with some issues. He's had colon surgeries and had all kinds of issues. Let's say somebody like him says, "Look, I don't want to play under these conditions." Do you say, "Okay, you sit this out for this year"?
Well,
is that fair to do?
I don't want to talk out of place here, but I feel like what's going to happen is majority rule is going to come into play. I mean, that's how when the NFL just had its recent CBA negotiations, there were players who didn't like it. There were players who liked it. At the end of the day, everybody had one vote, and the votes were tabulated among everybody. And there were enough people that wanted the CBA to go through that it went through, even though there were quite a lot of NFL players who didn't like the terms of the CBA.
But do you think the CBA and this pandemic is almost two different scenarios based off of this being some sort of natural, huge problem going on and not a standard CBA process?
Well, the circumstances are certainly different, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a collectively bargained agreement, right? And at the end of the day, it's going to take a vote to decide. And I think that's where the protocol stays, and that's the players are going to vote. And if more players vote to play than don't play, then the guys who don't want to play, or like Jake Diekman or whoever who might feel it's too risky, they cannot play, but then that's their choice to not be employed. I don't know if there's going to be a contingency.
And Diekman points out, he's had the ulcerative colitis. He has an 18-month-old child, and he doesn't want to put his child at risk. So there might be people that actually want to sit this out, and I think that maybe there should be room to respect some of that. And by the way, Sean Doolittle, you might know him of the Washington Nationals, the reliever. He had a pretty lengthy Twitter thread going on today, expressing a lot of his concerns with this. And if you kind of look at he says, that he kind of goes through all the different ways that you would have to protect players, not just players. He said all the people that are involved in the production of the game. He wants to make sure that everybody is safe. Now, again, somebody like him, a veteran of the leagues, made his money. Maybe he feels more comfortable saying that, but a lot of players, again, maybe that are fighting for a job at the major league minimum, they might have a difficult time agreeing to do that, right?
Yeah. What did you mean, though, when you said if Jake Diekman, because of his, I guess, maybe pre-existing conditions and things like that, does not want to play and that should be respected? Do you mean from a public perception standpoint, like we should say, Jake, we totally get it? Because I would respect that.
I think there's that, but I think
he's not going to play. He's not going to be. I don't think that he gets paid for it.
Right.
Just for
the Phillies don't say, "Hey, we'll save you a spot for when you're ready," because someone can come in and take it, and that's where the problem is.
Yeah, right. So I think that needs to be worked out. Can you have the opportunity to opt out of the season on your own, if put on some sort of restricted list if you don't feel like that you want to take that risk. And I think that's a really tough question. And there's going to be a lot of other tough questions. And what we'll do in our last segment today is talk about how this impacts the Phillies in particular. Let's say this works out. Will the Phillies be in a better spot, or will they be in a more challenging situation? More after this. Frank Close, Geoff Mosher, Hunter Brody. This is the Powder Blue Podcast. And welcome back to the Powder Blue Podcast. Frank Close, Geoff Mosher, Hunter Brody. And we are talking about MLB owners' latest proposal to resume play in Major League Baseball. And this is a real proposal. There are people that are actually talking about this. This is not some dream package that's being floated out through reporters to see what people think. They want people to play in their home ballparks, play regionally. And there's a couple things here I want to talk about specifically about the Phillies. So we've been talking about the general proposal so far, but two things here are going to affect the Phillies big time. First will be play against the National League East versus the American League East. They're going to expand the play to be regionalized. Therefore, the Phillies will play the Boston Red Sox. They'll play the New York Yankees. They'll play the Toronto Blue Jays, perhaps the Dunedin Blue Jays, the Tampa Bay Rays, and the Baltimore Orioles. So there's that. And then that means naturally, I say naturally, this is something we've talked about before, and I saved this for the last segment. There will be a designated hitter in 2020. Here it is. You know, for all the time we've talked about this before, this is going to be it. So does this proposal about who they play, about the designated hitter, does this help the Phillies? Does this hurt the Phillies? Geoff, we'll start with you.
I think it helps the Phillies. I think because the Phillies are a little bit built sometimes like an American League team. Their pitching isn't great, but, you know, they've got a guy in Jay Bruce who is not going to start, but could theoretically start for a lot of teams and still hit you 25 home runs and drive in 8. I mean, he was playing well for Seattle before he came back to the Phillies, right? From a power standpoint.
And played well for the Phillies.
Yeah, and then he played well for the Phillies. So, I mean, Roman Quinn is a guy that we talk about trying to get him into the lineup, and you can put him right there as the double leadoff thing. You know, batting ninth if you want to do, or batting him leadoff and somebody else. You can get him and Hazley in the game if Hazley's hitting well. I think it does benefit them. Yeah, I mean, it really does. That just because I think they have got some good punch off the bench right now.
I think it benefits them too. The only difference I'll say is I think it also benefits other teams maybe just as much as the Phillies. So then does it just equal itself out? Like, I do think it will help the Phillies, but if you got to look at other teams' rosters and other teams competing, it might do the same thing for them. So at the end of the day, does it just put them right where they were? Maybe do they jump over some teams and other teams go lower? I mean,
that's a point. You know, it's more like an equalizer than a benefit, right? I mean, it's going to benefit the National League teams who are now lumped in with American League teams who've been playing and building rosters with DH in mind for, you know, decades and centuries here. So now it gives the National League teams who have to play these American League teams a chance to match firepower with firepower. But from a strictly Phillies perspective, I mean, it may give an opportunity to get Alec Baum into the lineup, into the lineup and get a look at him, you know, for example. The whole shortened season may enable Spencer Howard, who everybody was worried about with the pitch limit. Now you don't have to worry about that as much in a half a season. So
cut him loose.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Spencer Howard. Did you guys happen to hear what Bryce Harper said on that Barstool Sports podcast about Spencer Howard and the Phillies front office? He was talking about how he really wanted to go to a place that was super smart and they wouldn't just trade up a ton of prospects just to go out and get a Chris Bryant. And it's funny that he mentioned Chris Bryant. He said, you know, it's one of my best friends, but I wanted to go to an organization that understood the power of prospects, and the name that he brought up was Spencer Howard. So, you know, I love hearing that. To me, that shows the front office knows how important Spencer Howard is, and hopefully that means that he will turn into that and become something that this team is going to have to benefit from soon.
Now, the one disadvantage to that is if you played a regular season, Alec Boehm could come up in June, Spencer Howard could come up with June, and they would have 6 more years beyond this year. You're kind of burning a whole year of control if you just cut them loose.
But let's see what the CBA looks like first.
Yeah, that's a
that
great question.
Something that's written into the language.
That'll be really
I
interesting
would
to
think
see.
it would be. If that's
Because,
gonna
you would
be
love to just cut these guys loose.
right, if that's going to be the thing to hold this back, I mean, I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of other things, but I think that that's one that is super reasonable to figure out.
Yeah.
And so, meanwhile, other teams in the league, you're talking about, if you think about the Mets, they have Dominic Smith. He might be their extra DH. The Atlanta Braves, maybe you're talking Austin Riley. I mean, none of them really scare you in terms of the National League East teams. Hey, it works out for the Washington Nationals because, Zimmerman, he really can't play the field that well anymore. So I guess he can make him their DH. And didn't they sign another first baseman? Who's the lefty bat? I can't remember his name. Who's been a tremendous. He played for the Braves and the Cardinals.
Donaldson? No.
No. Well, anyway,
Donaldson went to the Twins for some crazy.
Yeah, that's
deal,
why I was confused.
No, I know who. I was looking at the Nationals lineup the other day actually, and there was a name on there, and it's a shame that I can't remember it either. But
right,
they still have the worst podcast hosts ever that we forget the names of players like this.
It's all those
I'll
beers
find it
you're
one
drinking.
second. This is ginger beer. This is non-alcoholic.
That doesn't count. Doesn't count.
But by the way, but just to talk about the Nats for a second, they signed Howie Kendrick, right? He was sort of guy that jumped around. He's a heck of a bat. He can
he's
play
also
there.
Like 40 years old, isn't he?
He is. He's up there in his years, but he's a nice player. They signed Eric Thames as well. That's who I was thinking about.
Who it
so
is. That's who it is.
Marcus
they might have some decent options, but none of them might be better than the Phillies options if they have Alec Boehm and Jay Bruce to play with, and maybe you put Bruce at first base for a bit, and let Rhys Hoskins serve as DH. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it seems like the Phillies might have a little bit of an edge compared to the National League East. Now, that's not the same as having JD Martinez as your designated hitter in the Boston Red Sox, right? I mean, that's where you're going to see it doesn't totally match up. But at the end of the season, as long as you're fighting in division, you might be all right. Now, what about playing all those teams? It's one thing to talk about how you compare it to the National League East. If you're playing the Boston Red Sox, who maybe aren't as good as they were the last couple of years, but the Yankees are a good team. Like, will that hurt the Phillies long term in terms of how they might perform?
I think when you look around all of them, I think when you look around all these divisions and how they're split up now, it's kind of similar to what I said about with the Phillies. Yeah, maybe it helps them, but it helps other teams. You look around all this, and there's going to be teams where you look at, for example, the Phillies play the Orioles. Okay, well, that's nice, but then you factor in they got to play the Yankees, and you look through all of these divisions where they're going with the NL Central, NL Central. It's going to be the same exact concept. There'll be teams where it's a walk in the park, and then you see the teams at the top of it, and it'll be a battle.
By the way, I really wish they could do this and have this be a regular season where I could actually go to these ballparks. I hate Tropicana Field, but I would love to go down to St. Pete and see the Phillies there. I would love to go to Baltimore and stop at Pickles Pub beforehand. If anybody who's been down there, you might know Pickles Pub, but get a nice crab soup. But hey, we're watching it on TV, so so we shall see. So this will work itself out between the Players Association and MLB. Hopefully something comes together, and if it does, there will be Major League Baseball in a month for spring training too, and maybe in 2 months we're watching live action come July 4th, perhaps.
Just promise me, guys, this isn't going to fail miserably because my heart can't take it. Please don't tell me it's going to fail miserably.
I wish I haven't been able to.
I haven't been able to go axe throwing for 2 months, so I mean, like, nothing could be worse than that, right?
I don't know.
You don't strike me as a big axe thrower.
No, I've never actually done it in my life. I'm just joking around, but yeah, I agree. But at least for the first time, there's a real proposal. One side has agreed upon, and we will see how this plays out. Hopefully, by next week, we will have more answers, and that'll do it. We are out of time already, gentlemen. For Frank Close, Geoff Mosher, Hunter Brody. This is the Powder Blue Podcast. We will catch you next time.